My parents mocked me for working blue-collar jobs while spoiling my sister. Now I own the business they begged for help to save from. Bankruptcy? I'm a 30-year-old guy, and for most of my life, I've been the punchline in my own family. My parents always had this vision of what success was supposed to look like: a fancy degree, a shiny office, and a job that made them look good at family gatherings. I didn't fit that picture. After high school, I chose trade work instead. I became a mechanic, and honestly, I loved it. There was something satisfying about fixing things with my own two hands, seeing immediate results, helping people get back on the road. But in my parents' eyes, I was wasting my potential. Grease and sweat don't make you successful. My mom would say whenever I came home from the shop still wearing my work uniform. My dad would laugh and add, "At least Emily's work doesn't make her smell like motor oil." They always found new ways to remind me that my sister, the golden one, was the real pride of the family. Emily had gone to university, studied business, and landed a marketing job in the city. Every phone call was about her promotions, her office view, her company dinners. They treated her LinkedIn profile like a trophy cabinet. Meanwhile, if I mentioned landing a new client or fixing a difficult engine, my dad would just grunt and change the subject. I kept quiet most of the time. I didn't want to argue. Deep down, I was proud of the life I was building: steady income, loyal clients, and honest work. But every sarcastic comment chipped away at me. At a family dinner one evening, Emily announced she'd been assigned to help plan a corporate charity event. My mom practically teared up. "Our daughter's changing the world," she said. Then she turned to me with a smirk. "And what about you, honey? Still covered in grease?" Everyone laughed. I just smiled faintly, pretending it didn't sting, but inside, it burned more than I could admit. If there was ever a definition of favoritism, my parents could have been the poster couple. Emily didn't just grow up with more love, she grew up with more everything. When she turned 16, Dad bought her a brand new car, a shiny red sedan with a bow on top. I got a used toolbox and a pat on the back. "You're the practical one," my mom said. "You'll make something of it." They paid for her university tuition, her apartment in the city, even her designer wardrobe. Every time she came home, it was like royalty visiting the peasants. Mom cooked her favorite meals, Dad bragged about her big dreams. And me? I was the handyman they called when the sink leaked or the porch light flickered. I worked part-time through trade school, fixing cars during the day and studying wiring diagrams at night. I paid my own rent, my own bills, even helped Mom and Dad when they forgot to call an actual repairman. It wasn't gratitude that made me do it, it was loyalty, or maybe hope. I kept thinking that one day they'd see the value in what I did. The breaking point came the week of Emily's graduation. They threw her a massive party: balloons, catered food, champagne. There were photos, speeches, and endless toasts to her bright future. My birthday was 2 days before that. No cake, not even a text. I remember sitting quietly in the corner that night, listening to the laughter. My dad raised his glass and said to Emily, "Our pride and joy." I smiled, but something inside me cracked. Still, I stayed respectful. I didn't want to be the bitter son. I just told myself, work hard enough and they'll have no choice but to respect you. As Emily stepped into her marketing firm and her glamorous life, I clocked in at the workshop, oil-stained hands, tired eyes, but a heart that refused to quit. It started small, just me and 2 guys from the shop who shared the same drive. We pooled our savings, bought a used van, and painted our company name on the side: Reliable Repairs and Contracting. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Every morning, we met before sunrise, tools in hand, coffee in paper cups, ready to take whatever job came our way. The early months were brutal. We worked 16-hour days juggling plumbing emergencies, electrical rewiring, even the occasional drywall patch-up. There were weeks when I barely slept, driving home covered in sawdust and sweat. But little by little, word spread. Clients started recommending us. Then came small businesses, and eventually, property managers who needed regular maintenance for the first time. I felt like my life had direction, real, hard-earned progress. My savings account began to grow, and so did my confidence. I'd built something from the ground up, not with luck or family money, but grit. But when I shared the news with my parents, they just nodded blankly. "That's nice," my mom said, as if I'd told her I learned to fold a napkin. My dad chuckled. It's not a real business, son. You just fix things. Meanwhile, Emily's life looked like something straight out of a magazine. High-rise apartment, expensive handbags, weekend getaways. Her social media was a curated highlight reel of brunches and corporate events. Everyone thought she was living the dream. But I started noticing the cracks. A friend mentioned seeing her car get repossessed. Another said she'd been borrowing money. Then I overheard my mom whispering on the phone. Emily had asked them for a little help to make rent. I didn't say anything. I just went back to work, tightening bolts and signing contracts. Quietly, while Emily borrowed to keep up appearances. I was building something she couldn't fake: stability. It started with a rumor. Emily's company was downsizing. At first, I brushed it off. My sister had always found a way to land on her feet. But then weeks passed, and her social media posts started recycling old pictures, the same office desk, the same morning coffee hustle shot. Something felt off. Mom and Dad didn't notice. They were too busy bragging about her new projects. I knew the truth before anyone else did. A mutual acquaintance mentioned that Emily's department had been cut. She wasn't working. She was pretending. Meanwhile, my business was finally taking off. A property developer hired us for a major commercial renovation. It was the biggest contract we'd ever signed. Suddenly, we had steady income for months, new equipment, and the ability to hire more help. I brought on 3 apprentices from town, young guys who just needed a chance, like I once did. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel proud. I bought a small house, nothing extravagant, just a solid home with a yard and a garage big enough for my tools. I even paid off my truck in full. No loans, no help, just hard work. Still, I didn't boast. I kept my success quiet. My parents wouldn't have believed it anyway. Then came dinner at a local restaurant. Mom, Dad, Emily, and me. She was dressed in designer clothes, smiling too hard, avoiding any talk of work. I noticed her checking her phone like she was waiting for someone to bail her out when the check came. I reached for it without thinking. "I got it," I said. Mom blinked, surprised. Dad chuckled. "Big spender now, huh?" I just smiled, sliding my card to the waiter. Their laughter stung, but beneath it, I caught something new: confusion. Maybe, for the first time, they were starting to wonder. No matter how much progress I made, my family never stopped reminding me of where they thought I stood. Every visit home felt like walking into a performance, one where I was cast as the simple laborer. While Emily played the shining star, one Sunday dinner, Mom was setting the table when she looked at my hands. "You should really wear gloves when you work," she said, her voice half pity, half disgust. "They're so rough," Dad chuckled. "Well, at least your sister's job doesn't involve crawling under houses for a living." The table erupted in laughter. Even Emily smirked, swirling her wine like she was above it all. "Don't worry, little brother," she teased. "I've got some big projects coming soon. Maybe I'll hire your company to clean up after the real work's done." I forced a laugh, though every word felt like a slap. Inside, I was boiling. I wanted to tell them about the contracts we'd landed, the employees who depended on me, the fact that my company was bringing in more than Emily had ever made. But I didn't. They wouldn't believe me. Instead, I kept my face calm, my tone polite. I focused on cutting my food, nodding when they spoke. I'd learned something over the years. Silence sometimes says more than shouting ever could. Later that night, when I drove home, I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at my reflection in the windshield. The grease stains, the calloused hands, the tired eyes, they weren't signs of failure. They were proof of building. That's when it hit me. I didn't need their approval. I'd been chasing validation from people who would never see beyond their own pride. So, I made a vow to myself. From that moment on, I'd stop seeking their praise and focus on building something so solid. They couldn't ignore it, even if they tried. The truth came out by accident. I was at a client's office, finishing up some electrical work, when the manager casually mentioned something that made me freeze. "Funny thing," he said, leaning on the counter. "A woman named Emily came in last week, asking about the receptionist position. Said she used to work in marketing, but we didn't have anything open." I remember setting my wrench down slowly. Emily, last name. He said it, my sister's. I drove home in silence, the radio off, my thoughts loud. Emily, applying for receptionist jobs. The same Emily who bragged about leading campaigns and meeting CEOs It didn't make sense unless she'd been lying. That night, I checked her social media. The photos were the same old recycled shots, office selfies, fancy lunches, city skylines, but there hadn't been anything new in months. I noticed the little details I'd missed before. The same outfit reappearing, no tags, no coworkers in recent posts. The illusion was cracking. She'd been fired, probably months ago, and now she was drowning in debt, keeping the facade alive while our parents still bragged about her upcoming promotion. A part of me wanted to confront her. Another part wanted to laugh, not out of cruelty, but disbelief at how far she'd fallen chasing an image. But mostly, I felt pity. Emily had built her entire identity on other people's opinions. While I'd quietly built mine on sweat and steel, I didn't tell Mom or Dad. They wouldn't believe me. They were still posting about their successful daughter and her business trips, while I watched her story crumble from the sidelines. A week later, I noticed something else. Emily was selling things online. Designer bags, shoes, even her car. She used different usernames, but I knew her photos. Meanwhile, my company had just hit a milestone. 3 trucks on the road, new employees, more clients than we could handle. It was ironic, really. The sister who mocked me for smelling like grease was now selling her perfume collection just to stay afloat. It all came crashing down faster than I expected. One evening, my phone buzzed. Mom calling, her voice tight and trembling. "Do you know anything about these calls we're getting?" she asked. "Some credit company keeps asking for Emily." I said nothing, just listened as her tone shifted from confusion to fear. Within days, the truth spilled out. Creditors started flooding the family phone. Letters arrived. Threats of repossession. Late fees. Collections. Mom and Dad confronted Emily at the house one Sunday. I wasn't there, but Mom later told me what happened, her voice breaking between disbelief and shame. Emily confessed she'd been unemployed for almost half a year. The business trips were lies, the promotions, fabrications. She'd maxed out every credit card trying to keep up appearances, clothes, dinners, luxury furniture, all to look like she still belonged in the world she'd been kicked out of. He'd trusted her with some of their savings, part of his retirement fund, claiming she'd invest it smartly. Turns out, the money was gone, poured into some doomed online venture and months of rent. She couldn't afford. Panic spread quickly through the house. Mom cried. Dad paced in silence, clutching his head. And then, slowly, their desperation turned toward me. "Maybe your brother could help," Mom whispered, glancing at Emily. "Just something temporary. You know how well his little business is doing?" Little business. The same one they'd mocked for years. When they finally called me over, their tone was syrupy sweet, rehearsed. "You've always been so responsible," Dad said. "You've got a good head for money. Maybe you could step in, just for a while." I didn't answer. I just sat there, looking at the people who once laughed at my work, now begging for the stability they'd spent years ridiculing. For the first time, the roles had reversed, and I wasn't sure whether to feel satisfaction or sadness. A few days later, Mom called again, her voice soft, too soft. "We'd like to have you over for dinner," she said. "Just the family. We need to talk." I knew that tone. It wasn't a dinner invitation. It was an ambush wrapped in guilt. Still, I went. When I arrived, the table was set nicer than usual. Candles, wine glasses, even the good plates. They were putting on a show. Emily sat quietly, eyes red from crying, and my parents greeted me with forced smiles. Dad started the conversation, clearing his throat. "Son, your mother and I have been so proud of what you've built. You've really made something of yourself." That was new. I waited for the catch. Mom leaned forward. "We just need a little help. Things have gotten complicated. The mortgage is behind, and Emily's debts, well, they've gotten out of hand. We were thinking maybe if you could lend us something, just a small loan to help us through this rough patch." Her words were honeyed, but her eyes were desperate. Emily stared at her plate. The same people who used to roll their eyes when I talked about work were now calling me smart and successful. The irony was almost too heavy to bear. I didn't interrupt. I let them talk about how they'd always believed in me, how they knew I'd come through. Every compliment sounded rehearsed, every pause calculated. Inside, a storm brewed years of mockery. Every dinner where I'd been, the punchline. But on the outside, I was calm. I simply nodded and said, I'll think about it. Silence fell like a curtain. Mom looked stunned. Dad frowned, as if I'd broken some unspoken rule. And then Emily finally cracked. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Please, your family. You can't just watch us fall." I didn't answer. I just sat there, watching the illusion of their perfect little hierarchy collapse in front of me. A few days later, Mom called again, her voice soft, too soft. "We'd like to have you over for dinner," she said. "Just the family. We need to talk." I knew that tone. It wasn't a dinner invitation. It was an ambush wrapped in guilt. Still, I went. When I arrived, the table was set nicer than usual. Candles, wine glasses, even the good plates. They were putting on a show. Emily sat quietly, eyes red from crying, and my parents greeted me with forced smiles. Dad started the conversation, clearing his throat. "Son, your mother and I have been so proud of what you've built. You've really made something of yourself." That was new. I waited for the catch. Mom leaned forward. "We just need a little help. Things have gotten complicated. The mortgage is behind, and Emily's debt's, well, they've gotten out of hand. We were thinking maybe if you could lend us something, just a small loan to help us through this rough patch." Her words were honeyed, but her eyes were desperate. Emily stared at her plate. The same people who used to roll their eyes when I talked about work were now calling me smart and successful. The irony was almost too heavy to bear. I didn't interrupt. I let them talk about how they'd always believed in me, how they knew I'd come through. Every compliment sounded rehearsed, every pause calculated. Inside, a storm brewed years of mockery. Every dinner where I'd been, the punchline. But on the outside, I was calm. I simply nodded and said, "I'll think about it." Silence fell like a curtain. Mom looked stunned. Dad frowned, as if I'd broken some unspoken rule. And then Emily finally cracked. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Please, your family. You can't just watch us fall." I didn't answer. I just sat there, watching the illusion of their perfect little hierarchy collapse in front of me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, replaying the dinner over and over. Part of me wanted to help, that stubborn, loyal part that still wanted to be the good son. But every time I thought of wiring them money, I remembered every sneer, every mocking laugh, every time they made me feel like less than family the next day. I drove past the old neighborhood, the house I grew up in. It looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling, the porch light still flickering from the last time I offered to fix it. I parked outside and sat there, watching the curtains sway in the breeze. I could almost see the ghosts of my childhood, a younger me, trying to earn their approval, holding up report cards, working part-time to pay for my tools. I went inside when Mom called me in. The living room hadn't changed, the same family photos on the wall, Emily in her graduation gown. Mom and Dad, smiling proudly beside her. My picture was smaller, tucked in the corner like an afterthought. The conversation turned ugly fast. "You're really not going to help," Dad said, voice rising. "After everything this family's done for you, everything." I repeated quietly. Mom folded her arms. "You've been holding on to grudges for years. You're better than this. Don't be heartless." Then Emily, tear-streaked and shaking, snapped, "You could have helped me before it got this bad. You knew I was struggling. You just wanted to watch me fail." Something in me broke then, not in anger, but clarity. They didn't want help. They wanted control. I stood up slowly. "No matter what I give, it'll never be enough, will it?" No one answered. Just silence, heavy, suffocating. I turned toward the door. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small or guilty. I felt free as I stepped outside. The old door creaked behind me, and I realized I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking away from the version of me that still believed I owed them something. After that night, something inside me hardened, but not in a cruel way. It was clarity. I realized I'd spent my whole life trying to prove myself to people who were never going to see me for who I was. So, I stopped chasing their approval and started investing that energy into the one thing that had never let me down: my work. I threw myself into the business. Early mornings turned into long but purposeful days. I expanded operations, opened new branches, and hired more staff. Soon, we weren't just a local contracting team, we were a regional name. The calls never stopped coming. Developers wanted us on their projects. I found myself standing on stages at trade conferences, talking about entrepreneurship and the value of skilled labor. I wasn't the quiet, overlooked kid anymore. I was someone people listened to. I started mentoring apprentices, young men and women who reminded me of myself at their age. Told that their work wasn't respectable, watching them grow was its own reward. With time, I bought commercial property not to show off, but to give my team a headquarters we could be proud of. Every wall, every tool, every truck was a reminder that dignity doesn't come from titles or suits. It comes from building something real. I stopped checking my phone for their calls. The silence that used to sting now felt peaceful. I'd built a life that didn't depend on anyone's validation. Then, one afternoon, my assistant walked in with a file. "A company wants to meet with you," she said. Setting it down on my desk, I glanced at the name printed on the letterhead. Henderson & Co., my father's company. For a long moment, I just stared at it, a faint smile creeping in. The same man who once mocked my little repair jobs was now knocking on my door for help. When I walked into the meeting room, it was like stepping into a different universe. My parents sat across from me, Dad in a faded suit that had seen better days. Mom clutching a leather folder like it was a lifeline. Emily was there too, quieter than I'd ever seen her, her confidence replaced with exhaustion. Dad stood up, forcing a smile. "Son," he began, his tone rehearsed, "I'm glad you came. This could be a great family opportunity." Family opportunity. That phrase almost made me laugh. He slid a stack of papers across the table. Debt statements, foreclosure warnings, unpaid invoices. Their small business, the one they'd once boasted about, was drowning. Their supplier had raised prices, clients were pulling out, and the bank had stopped returning calls. Mom leaned in, voice trembling. "We know you've done so well for yourself. Maybe you could come on as a partner. Help us rebuild. It would mean so much to keep this in the family." I listened in silence, just like I had at that dinner months ago. Only this time, I wasn't the quiet son in the corner. I was the one holding the cards. Finally, I spoke. "You mentioned your supplier," I said evenly. "The one giving you trouble." Dad nodded quickly. "Yes, Henderson Materials. They've been bleeding us dry." "I know," I interrupted, leaning back. "Because I own it." Their faces froze. Mom's mouth fell open. Emily looked like she'd stopped breathing. I explained calmly that my company had acquired the supplier 6 months ago. Every shipment, every invoice, every extension, it all went through me. Their survival depended on the same blue-collar business they once mocked. For the first time in my life, they didn't look at me with condescension. They looked at me with respect. And Dad finally whispered, "What do you want?" I met his eyes. "To buy you out," I said, "completely. I'll take care of your employees and your debts. But this is business, not family." He tried to speak, but I stood up. "You taught me to chase something respectable, Dad. I just took your advice only better." The paperwork was signed a week later. Just like that, the business my parents had spent decades glorifying their pride, their proof of respectability, now belonged to me. The transfer was clean, professional, and absolute. No arguments. No lingering negotiations. I walked through their old office the next morning, sunlight cutting through the dusty blinds. The walls were lined with fading photos, Dad shaking hands with clients, Emily posing at company dinners. The air smelled like old coffee and desperation. I paused for a moment, then called my new management team, and my first order of business was simple: restructure, stabilize, and protect the workers. The employees hadn't caused this mess, they'd just been following orders. They deserved better leadership, and I intended to give it to them. My parents showed up a few days later. Mom carried a box of old files. Dad tried to act like it was just business, but the tension was thick. They wanted to talk about the good old days, about keeping things friendly. I listened, nodded politely, and walked them to the door. They kept reaching out after that dinner invites, check-in calls, little attempts to bridge the gap. I never shut them out completely, but I didn't let them back in either. The emotional distance wasn't revenge. It was self-preservation. Every morning when I unlocked the office, I felt a strange peace. The version of me who once begged for their respect was gone. I didn't need them to say, "We're proud of you." Their silence was proof enough. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of my reflection in the glass doors, hands scarred, nails still dark from years of work. I'd smile to myself and think, they used to mock the dirt on my hands. Now, it's gold under my nails. And for the first time in my life, I didn't just feel successful. I felt free.